Just a minute, please hold, because it was not on. I have to. Welcome to the online class of Professor S.K. Paul, HOD, University Department of English, BRA, Bihar University, Muzaffarpur. Good afternoon, the dear students of PhD coursework. Today I am going to deliver my lecture on feminist eco-criticism. Although eco-criticism has been slow to respond to the ethical and ideological questions raised by ecofeminism, which has in the first place subverted the masculinist matrix of ideological formations within Western cultures. The political, ethical, and the theoretical import of ecofeminist positions have recently been reconfigured within a new mode of eco-critical inquiry called feminist eco-criticism. Instead of drawing a distinction between eco-criticism and ecofeminism, which would imply pitting one against the other, Simon Stock suggests that building on the extents of each approach, looking at ways they complement each other, and working toward defining more fully what each approach envisions. I would be far more productive. This promise is inaugurated by Greta Gard in her 2010 essay, New Directions for Ecofeminism, toward a more feminist eco-criticism, where she announces the emergence of feminist eco-criticism and prospectively notes that the intersectional analysis of nature, gender, race, class, species, and sexuality is not confined to an essentialist definition of feminism or ecofeminism, but rather offers a strategic conceptual approach toward bringing about the social justice, economic and ecological democracy needed to solve environmental crises in the present moment. Following Gard, I will argue that feminist eco-criticism brings a more pronounced feminist dimension to eco-critical studies, expanding eco-criticism's scope and critical trajectory toward environmental and women's reproductive justice, transcorporeality of bodily natures, material feminisms, animal studies, and queer ecologies. Incorporating such a diversity of perspectives in terms of gender, sexuality, race, identity, and species rights, feminist eco-criticism affirms the necessity of a new theoretical feminist perspective in environmental literatures, cultures, and science studies. Feminist eco-criticism also adopts a post-humanist ethical stance, which, as Stacy Alamo contends, allows us to forge ethical and political positions that can contend with numerous late 20th or early first 20th or early 21st century realities in which human and environment can no longer be considered separate. From this perspective, feminist eco-criticism can be defined as the new eco-feminist settlement, specifically in the fields of eco-critical studies and environmental humanities, drawing selectively upon previous paradigms proposed within diverse branches of eco-feminist theory, which posited various analyses of the connections among racism, sexism, um, classism and colonialism, speciesism, and the environment. Feminist eco-criticism discloses an eco-feminist vision that includes a broader scope of embodied materialist analysis of post-humanist conceptions of corporeality and their literary permutations in the intersections between ecofeminism and eco-criticism, model upon Labor's concept of the new settlement, which he has proposed to contest the dualistic logic of modernity. I will frame my argument around the concept of a new economist settlement with a more reciprocally transformed around the concept of a new eco-feminist settlement with a more reciprocally transformed sense of the human and non-human worlds. In a more specific sense, the new eco-feminist settlement can be read as an emergent configuration that debunks the objectification of the natural world, women, matter, bodily natures, and non-human species, and opens new eco-vistas into exploring the dynamic coexistensivity and permeability of human and non-human bodies and natures. Feminist eco-criticism is the paradigmatic form of the new approach that attempts to bring sustaining meanings in the realm of materiality, discourse, and cultural imaginary for the purpose of dismantling dualistic otherness framed by the gendered and dualistic symbolism in Western thought, like Timothy Morton's Ecology Without Nature. Feminist eco-criticism offers a vision of ecology without gender. This is not to say that the human is reduced into a natural category, but must be thought outside the confines of gender dichotomies and thus outside of their abductive power imbricated in heteronormative expectations, language, and what some theorists call heteropatriarchy. Feminist eco-criticism is thus an anti-dualist, phallogen-centric theory contesting anthropocentric and phallogocentric epistemologies and subverting all gendered association. It sheds light on the complex interconnections of gender, sexuality, ecology, and ideology that have impacts beyond women's bodies. On that basis, it can be said that feminist eco-criticism proceeds from the perspective of a post-humanist ethic of the respectful encounter with differences the other. The post-humanist vision is characterized by its emphasis on the differential constitution of humans and non-humans. That is, differences and distinctions matter in the interconnections of human and non-human spheres, not in the sense of accepting the superiority of the human and the devaluation of the non-human, or of the privileging the non-human at the expense of the human. but in terms of their complex entanglements in nature's queer performativity. Karen Barrett lucidly explains why differences matters by stating that the post-humanist point is not to blur the boundaries between human and non-human, not to cross out all distinctions and differences, and not to simply invert humanism, but rather to understand the non-humans. Barrett's argument is premised upon the materializing practices of differentiating and materializing effects of boundary making practices. These practices produce crucial materializing effects that need to be accounted for without taking differences and distinctions between cultural and natural forces and human and non-human actors to be foundational. This reason that ostensibly highlights the concurrence of the corporal practice and production of social discourses animates the new materialist theoretical discussions and standpoints of material feminisms that encourage us to think transversally. In other words, the interactions between nature and culture, language and reality, between ecosystems and the social and cultural structures are so entangled that disregarding this fact leads us to more fragmentary thought, which, as David Bohm would say, will bring more pollution, disorder, and destruction of the balance of nature. Thinking transversally then closes not only the Cartesian gap between mind and matter, but also allows us to recognize the ideological associations between speciesisms and heterosexism, and intersecting issues of gender, sexuality, and the non-human world. Exemplifying this mode of liberatory thinking, Greta Gard, in her 2010 essay "Strategies for a Cross-Cultural Eco-Feminist Literary Criticism," concedes that such connections create linked valuations, such as associating masculinity with activity, rationality, and culture, and equating women and femaleness with nature and passivity, which in turn lead to a system of hierarchy. Consequently, Gard observes the kind of hierarchy is used to justify the domination of female nature and all those so associated, emphasizing the importance of the centrality of social diversity and biodiversity as necessary foundations to our survival on this planet. She draws attention to the necessity of a deep critique of the many forms of alienation, hierarchy, and domination, including but not limited to speciesism, sexism, racism, classism, heterosexism, ageism, ableism, and anthropocentrism. As many eco-feminist thinkers have previously argued, the so-called naturalized forms of othering, speciesism, sexism, transmentalism, and domination have entailed an almost exclusive emphasis on the interconnected anthropocentric and androcentric assumptions concerning the intersections of sex and nature. Val Plumwood, for example, claims that dualisms, though not immediately seen as variants of a gendered reason or nature contrast are derived from this basic link between sex and nature. In ecofeminism, in ecofeminist natures, race, gender, feminist theory, and political action. Noel Sturgeon also deliberates over how nature is raised and gendered through such concomitant postulates. The political and ethical import of the relations between sexuality and nature has been widely discussed in a similar way and summed up by Karen Warren, who has provided a theoretical space of conceptual framework for what she calls a transformative feminism in challenging anthropocentric and patriarchal systems of domination, including sexism, racism, speciesism, and naturalism. It is imperative that feminist eco-criticism foreground more theoretically the intersections of sex and nature, which as Catriona Mortimer, Sandy Lance, and Bruce Erickson note, exist institutionally, discursively, scientifically, spatially, politically, poetically, and ethically, but it goes beyond mere theoretical foregroundings. It expands these intersections by theorizing the coexistensivity of art and complex entanglements between bodies, natures, and discourses. The ideological implications of the move are such that our social and cultural meanings and all political decisions, to quote Stacey Alamo and Susan Heckman, are scripted onto material bodies. Materiality is literally written onto the very flesh of our bodies, and our hazardous substances that are released daily in unimaginable quantities all around the planet are mapped onto all bodily natures, leading, as Serinella Iovino points out, to significant consequences of the entanglement of matter and meaning for eco-criticism. Understanding such interactions, or in Alaimo's conceptualization, transcorporal relations is, in Iovino's words, essential to a process of emancipation and liberation. Understanding that environmental toxins are feminist issues helps one understand and seek solutions for women's predicaments in different cultures, but also the interactions of sexuality and nature, of bodily natures, and of social and environmental forces of process. What is fundamental to feminist eco-criticism in this regard is to critically engage with the new materialist conceptualizations of matter, such as human and non-human bodies, and organic and inorganic substances and forces as an active agency and its biocultural constitutions. As Sandy Lance and Erickson put it, sexual relations organized and influence the material world of nature and our perceptions, experience, and constitutions of that world. Many new materialist feminists endorse the emerging paradigm with interesting accounts of how sexual diversity, sexual relations in both the human and the non-human world, and material agency transform our biocultural formations and our still persistent anthropocentric conceptions of nature, culture, sex, Gender and Matter. Stacy Alaimo and Susan Hickman's Material Feminisms 2008 is perhaps one of the most critically acclaimed collections that heralds the transgressive progressive potential for theoretical engagement with materiality. Material feminisms could be useful in developing feminist eco-critical models that are more inclusive of social, sexual, and biodiversity and provide guidance in a world of interestingly detrimental and acute ecological crisis where as Val Plumwood has incisively argued, human-centered conceptual frameworks are a direct hazard to non-humans, but are also an indirect potential this awareness has resulted in the new materialist rethinking of bodies and natures, which can be the driving force behind feminist eco-criticism's aim of building the new eco-feminist settlement. The new materialists and material feminists perceive nature as an active, signifying force and agent in its own terms, a realm of multiple inter and interactive cultures, being the liberated from its previous conceptualizations as a blank, silent resource for the exploits of culture and from being considered as a repository of sexism, racism, and homophobia. Nature is discussed as a significant participatory force filled in the entanglement of meaning and matter. The very materiality of nature's bodies, forces, and substances is deliberated over their interconnections with discursive formations in social, cultural, and political, literary, and philosophical fields. The intersections of materiality and discursivity create agentic fields of natural emergence of all life forms and connect human knowledge practices with bio and mind is emergent is body environment. To elucidate this point at the co-emergence of natural cultural evolution, Wendy Wheeler writes in her introduction to biosemiotics, nature culture science semiosis, one of the living books about life that questions raised by biosemiotically informed understandings concern not only the ways in which cultures re-articulate patterns in nature within their own historical, cultural umwelten and the understanding of mind as embodied and inworlded distributed intelligence, but also the relationship between living and non-living nature. That is, that the material world is legible both senso-copically for everyone and idioscopically via science, raises the topic of physiosemiosis. In fact, that for living things, matter is lively and potentially legible in living body. Mind, Welton Pierce perfused. Pierce himself thought that matter was effective mind. Pierce, 1992. In a universe perfused with science. The biosemiotic attestation that matter is agentic, lively, and perfused with science, and that the material world is legible, recalls not only Jane Bennett's theorization of matter's vibrancy and vitality, but also Karen Barrett's conceptualization of the of the complex vibrancy and vitality, but also Karen Barrett's conceptualization of the complementarity between matter and discourse, and matter and meaning. Thus, from a perspective that conflates materiality and discursivity, and a vision that cultivates the co-emergence of nature cultures. The new materialist stance creates an interesting critical impulse toward an epistematic shift in social sciences, environmental humanities, and feminist theory. This radical vision is foremost premised upon the critically acknowledged agentic capacity of vibrant matter, theorizing a vitality intrinsic to materiality, and identifying the human non-human assemblages as a locus of agency. Janet Bennett, for example, proposes a shift from environmentalism to vital materialism, from a world of nature versus culture to a heterogeneous monism of vibrant bodies. This conceptual shift is articulated in such metaphorical terms as Andrew Pickering's concept of the mangle, the constitutive intertwining between material and human agency. Bruno Latour's actor network theory, a network in which both human and non-human actors are semiotically and materially interrelated. Stacy Alaimo's transcorporeality, and Deleuze and Guattari's assemblages, taking her cue from the concept of assemblage to indicate how the human is always already intertwined with the non-human. Bennett invokes bacteria colonies in human elbows, and thus shows how human subjects are themselves non-human, alien, outside vital materiality. According to Bennett, the human agency is always an assemblage of microbes, animals, plants, metals, chemicals, word sounds, and the like. Indeed, that insofar as anything acts at all, it has already entered an agentic assemblage. The interchanges of humans and their social, legal, and linguistic constructions, and active and powerful non-humans, electrons, trees, wind, fire, electromagnetic field, are theorized in a horizontal way. Donna Haraway refers to such mingling of diverse entities, both human and non-human, as the partners in unfoldings of the flesh. Similar to Bennett's view of entanglements, Haraway considers all material things to be composed of diverse agents of interpretation and conceives them as conjoined force. The way she elaborates on the conjunction foregrounds a possibility not of coherent and harmonious blend of human and non-human natures, but one that blatantly exposes the problematic motley of associations such as enclosure and their effects in the compounds, and never purely themselves. Things are compound, they are made up of combinations of other things coordinated to magnify power, to make something happen, to engage the world, to risk fleshly acts of interpretations. Technologies are always compound. They are composed of diverse agents of interpretation, agents of recording, and agents for directing and multiplying relational action. These agents can be human beings or parts of human beings, other organisms in part or whole, machines of many kinds, or other sorts of entrained things made to work in the technological compound of conjoined forces. Remember also, one of the meanings of compound is an enclosure within which there is a residence or a factory or perhaps a prison or temple. Finally, a compound animal in zoological terminology refers to a opposite of individual organisms, an enclosure of zones, a company of creatures enfolded into one, connected by critter camps stolen, that is the circulatory apparatus of its compounded visualizing practices. Zones are technologies and technologies are zones. In their introduction, Diana Kuhl and Samantha Frost, the editors of the much acclaimed volume New Materialisms, Ontology, Agency, and Politics, also discern matter as active, self-creative, productive, unpredictable, with emergent generative powers, which can only be properly understood in what they call choreographies of becoming. The diva of the new materialist theory, quantum physicist Karen Barad, however, provides the most elaborate theoretical framework for this new paradigm by proposing a post-humanist performative approach to understanding techno-scientific and other natural cultural practices that specifically acknowledges and takes account of matter's dynamism. This dynamism, she argues, is agency. Agency is not an attribute but ongoing reconfiguring of the world. The universe is an agential intraactivity in its becoming. Bard coins the term interaction to explain the mutual constitution of entangled agencies. Interaction does not assume separate agencies that precede their interaction, rather distinct agencies. Brand claims emerge through their interaction. Barrett's post-humanist approach, as I have argued elsewhere, has significantly implications for feminist eco-criticism because it provides a solid foundation for feminist discussions of the body that transcends the dualism of discourse and matter, as well as biological sex and gender as categories of cultural analysis. The gendered bodies are no longer embodied discursive subjects, but emerge through their differential becoming as embodied subjects interacting with the myriads of visible and invisible agents of the material world, bacteria, viruses, toxic chemicals, food, water, energy. In a categorical compliance with the insights of the new materialisms, feminist eco-criticism's conceptual horizons rest on the assumption that the gendered dichotomies hidden in the phallocentric Western thought can be surmounted by adopting a relational ontology emerging from what Karen Barrett calls material discursive practices. According to Barrett, the relationship between the material and the discursive is one of mutual entailment. Accommodating this integral vision, feminist eco-criticism considers gendered bodies not as purely cultural or discursive constructs, but as differentially constituted material discursive subjects enmeshed in the material world of powerful volatile agents, agents such as toxic chemicals, radioactivity, and viruses. It investigates the embodiment of gendered bodies in earthly processes and how our bodies interact with immediate forms of agentic matter and especially poisonous substances. These are agentic lethal entities Stacy Limo labels as deviant agencies of xenobiotic chemicals which co-constitute much of the bodily natures in highly toxic environments. Both humans and non-humans inhabit today. The human body, Alaimo writes, is permeable and thus vulnerable to particular locations and substances, and the very substance of the self is interconnected with vast biological, economic, and industrial systems that can never be entirely mapped and understood. In this sense, the social and the biological compose what Nancy Towner calls a vicious porosity of human and non-human realms, just as the porosity of entities does in her understanding of the interchanges between human and non-human bodily natures. Joanna discusses Hurricane Katrina as emblematic of the viscous porosity between humans and our environment, between social practices and natural phenomena. Viscous porosity explains the interweaving of human agency with the more than human world in ways that illuminate how we are co-constituted, how, for example, the water we drink, the food we consume, and the might we sleep with in our beds become part of our flesh, making all ontological divides between the human and the environment untenable. Transcorporeality is another significant new materialist concept that explains the inseparability of human corporeality from non-human environments by emphasizing the movement across bodies. Transcorporeality reveals the interchanges and interconnections between various bodily natures. In her important essay, Transcriptorial Feminism and the Ethical Space of Nature, Stacy Alimo defines the concept as a theoretical site, a place where corporeal theories and environmental theories meet and mingle in productive ways. Like a viscous porosity, transcorporeality designates ethical, social, biological, and cultural meanings that emerge from what Limo calls the literal contact zone between human corporeality and more than human nature. The conceptualizations of agency in terms of creativity, generative power, action, and effectivity, rather than in terms of its human attributes of intentionality, purposive behavior, rationality, and moral will, opens up an understanding of freedom and consonant with feminist eco-criticism's vision, in that, to quote Elizabeth Gross's, freedom is always and only enacted within and through the materiality that life and the non-living share, elucidating Bergson's concept of freedom that she claims coheres readily with feminist conceptions of liberation, sexual justice, the right to self-making, and a struggle for autonomy. Gross maintains Gross maintains that freedom is primarily to be understood as a capacity of the body. It is linked to the body's capacity for movement and thus its multiple possibilities for action. Freedom, according to Gross, is attained only through the struggle with matter, the struggle of bodies to become more than they are, a struggle that occurs not only on the level of the individual but also of the species. Since freedom functions through activity, a Gross observes gayness, for example, becomes the enactment of freedom that can refuse to constrain sexuality and sexual partners to any given function, purpose, or activity. A more striking example of how freedom functions through activity can be given from more than 1500 animal species with sexual diversity or homosexuality, which can transform our conceptions of nature, culture, sex, gender, and other fundamental categories. Queer animals' same-sex behavior is documented in such publications as Bruce Bigmill's Biological Exuberance, Animal Homosexuality, and Natural Diversity. Walker, Summer, and Paul V. Vesey's edited volume, Homosexual Behavior in Animals, an Evolutionary Perspective, and Aldo Poyani's Animal Homosexuality, a Biological Perspective, which point to the performative enactment of freedom from an evolutionary perspective, a performative understanding of this behavioral pattern seen in hundreds of mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fishes, insects, spiders, and other invertebrates, clearly contests the persistent heteronormative perception of natural agencies that are believed to lack autonomy. The same-sex behavior in numerous animal species illustrates the post-humanist performativity of material bodies in their interactive becoming. Employing the renewed sense of freedom, feminist eco-criticism recasts the ethical concerns about the experience of queer animals and transgendering in more than human environments to make central place for post-human ethical value. This particular feminist focus on queer elements in non-human nature, for example, not only provides better accounts of the sexual diversity of natural creatures, as Stacy Limo deftly notes, but also provokes a rethinking of our most basic sense of what nature and culture mean. The enactment of freedom is closely associated with agency, which Barrett consolidates as doing or being, is in its intra-activity. That means the acts of nature are emblematic of nature's intra-activity, its queer performativity. It is through such dynamics that the interplay of agential bodies and environmental constitutes the ongoing materialization of the world in its intra-active becoming. Intersex animals instantiate one of the many dimensions of the ongoing process. So, this way, my dear students, I have completed my lecture. My lecture is over for today. I have finished my lecture. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, all of you. Lots of thanks that you have attended my class and stayed with me and have stayed with me all along. So I'm very happy. Again, next day I will announce beforehand. Thank you.